English translation, 609th contact, Thursday, the 22nd of January 2015, 21:08 hours.
There you are, Ptaah. Greetings and welcome, my friend. You just called me off the movie I was watching on TV with Eva. Were you out in the hall?
Greetings, dear friend Edward. Yeah, I was over by the kitchen door and saw someone was in the kitchen, so I called you in.
You left Eva's office door open. If someone could have walked in uninhibitedly. But look here, you should read this article by Marianne as well as these pages here. It will take half an hour, because I want to leave you alone, if that's all right with you, because then I can finish the thriller on TV together with Eva.
Go ahead, my friend. In the meantime, until you come back, I will read this article and these pages.
All right, thanks. See you then. Here I am again, and I see that you have also come to terms with reading. What do you mean, everything?
I think Marianne's article is good and important. Therefore, it should be included in a special bulletin as soon as possible and published immediately on the internet. The other one I read I want to discuss with you partly privately.
We at Figu distance ourselves from Charlie. Nous ne sommes pas Charlie. George Orwell sends his regards. With satire terror and violent terror for total surveillance and enslavement of consciousness, true freedom is inner freedom.
At that time, already in the time of Muhammad the Prophet and Emmanuel the Prophet, it was known by predictions and prophecies that in the modern age of the coming 20th and 21st century the destructive beast would begin to work with the number 666, cult religions and sects without equal as well as secret societies, which would flood the whole of mankind with their sectarian madness and delusional faith. Sentence 1369 from Ein offene Wort, Billy, Fegu, Wasser man zeit Verlag. Immediately after the totally disgusting terrorist attacks of the insane Islamists and henchmen of the IR, Islamisti, Sher Staat, and/or the Al-Qaeda on the police and the caricaturists of Charlie Hebdo in Paris, which cost a total of 12 people their lives, the events are overturning. Sympathizers and outraged citizens meet in mass gatherings, and headlines and buzzwords flash in paper and online newspapers and other media, such as "Freedom prevails over barbarism," "Attack on freedom," "Attack on freedom and values," "Attack on freedom of opinion and freedom of the press," "Rising up against terror," "Rather die than live on your knees," "Civilization and barbarism, hand in hand," etc., etc., and the Swiss tabloid Blick even said profoundly, "Now at the latest we must be aware, terrorism is in our midst. He kills people, destroys the values of the West, undermines our civilization, our freedom, even in Switzerland. The common, level-headed people, the followers, and also many journalists, editors, and politicians blow the same horn and cry out for revenge. Now more than ever is their motto, which is already proven by the large circulation of 5 million copies, usually 60,000, of the first edition of the satire magazine Charlie Hebdo after the terrorist attack on the 7th of January 2015, which was incomprehensibly sold out within a few minutes. And again Muhammad had to serve, this time with the abstruse saying, "Tout est pardon, everything is forgiven." But for once, the USA amazes me, as the respected New York Times has so far refused to print the latest Muhammad cartoon of the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. Critics call this praiseworthy fact incredibly cowardly and shameful testimony of self-censorship. http://www. Spiegel. De Kultur, Gesellschaft, Charlie Hebdo. New York Times verweigert Abdruck. Von Karikaturen A. 1012839. HTML. The confusion of consciousness of these critics and all other Philistines must be contagious, for otherwise they would realize the negative effects that arise from it. They and all we are Charlie criers have no idea that the universal coincidence, the creational natural law of causality, or the law of cause and effect, has existed since the beginning of the universe, and that it means that a cause results in logical processes that merge seamlessly and thus become a coincidence that then forms an effect. See Lehrschrift für die Lehre der Wahrheit, Lehre des Geistes, Lehre des Lebens, Billy, Fegu, Wassermannseit Verlag. Only fantasists imagine that a satire provocation terror would result in a pleasing coincidence. The reality will rather be bloody Al-Qaeda, as well as anarchy terror, which will frighten us and our descendants with acts of violence over decades or even centuries, or until the moment we start to think and act differently, namely according to the law of creation. In addition to the general tabloid tenor, there are also occasional letters to the editor or guest commentaries printed, which take some distance from this euphoric and stupid howling, but whose writers do not dare to say what's going on in a clear and concise manner. Two of the guest comments I would like to mention anyway. The first guest commentary, printed in the NZZ of the 13th of January 2015, is entitled With Sorcerers' Apprentices in a Boat. Subtitle, There is no question on which side we fight when we have to choose between the pencil and the rifle. But there are better battlefields than the right to religious ridicule, by Thomas Masson, director at the German Historical Institute in Paris. If you are not familiar with the history of the Sorcerer's Apprentice, you can find information under the following link, http://de Wikipedia org/wiki/der_Zauberlehrling, Thomas Mason. Among others, writes, much more than nowadays in our country, in many Muslim countries, it is the common religion that creates social cohesion. Accordingly, the believers, also the peaceful ones, react sensitively when what they consider holy is affected. If one respects this sensitivity, then this is not indulgence against bloody blackmail. Satire has to hold up the mirror mercilessly to corrupt religious institutions, bigoted clerics, or fanatical believers. For this purpose, she does not need to mock religious symbols or figures like Jesus or Muhammad. She doesn't have to ask those who might feel hurt not to feel hurt. Even those who no longer have a religious ear know that there is a place for all of us where fun stops. But this place isn't the same everywhere. In the West, we don't find jokes about the Holocaust funny. Anti-racism laws are an expression of this specific, historically grown culture. The whole text can be read Lorenz Langer, lecturer at the University of Zurich and author of the book Religious Offense and Human Rights, touches in the second guest commentary in the NZZ on the 15th of January 2015, mainly on the legal side, but makes some interesting statements at the beginning. Today we are all Charlie. But when the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo caused a stir for the first time in February 2006, with the reprint of the Danish Mohammed cartoons, the echo was predominantly critical. The then President of France, Jacques Chirac, condemned them as obvious provocations that dangerously stirred up emotions. Unlike his daughter today, Jean-Marie Le Pen also disapproved of the drawings, not without demanding the same respect for the feelings of Christian believers on this occasion. The then British Foreign Secretary Jack Straw also said that freedom of the press did not mean freedom to unnecessarily provoke. The cartoons were insulting, insensitive, disrespectful, and false. Javier Solana, then representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs, stressed that freedom of the press must respect religious symbols. And even the American African government was critical. The Foreign Ministry said it was unacceptable to incite religious hatred in this way. This statesmanship wisdom has almost completely disappeared. What for? Is provocation, disrespectful, and unethical behavior in? Don't people see what they're doing with it? Are they not in a position to foresee what they are doing with their criminal and intelligenceless behavior? What spiral of violence they are provoking? A man who simply howls with the wolves because he is infected without thinking about what he is really howling for and what the consequences are is a pathetic type. Whether he is an allegedly educated man or a fanatical follower of some religion or party. Why are nonsensical anniversaries commemorating wars celebrated everywhere, without considering why they actually erupted, and to draw a parallel to what is happening today? The ridiculously blue-eyed cry of the politicians and the people never again war is just as stupid as the criminal ignoring of the incidents of the present. Today's youth laughs mockingly at the sorrowful admonitions of the older generation, who still remember the fearsome marches of the SS NSDAP Schutzstaffel, Personal Leib- und Prügelguard des Vorsitzenden der NSDAP, Adolf Hitler, and the euphoric rejoicing and thunderous applause at the appearance and the suggestive, seductive speeches of the mass murderer and head of battle, Reich Chancellor Adolf Hitler. The rallies of Pegida patriotic Europeans against the Islamization of the Occident must above all cause goosebumps of horror to people of Jewish faith. Only the boots and the tight uniform are missing. At the moment it is Islam that comes to the box office, but a little later the Jews will also be there again. That is as sure as the Amen in the church. And what is the respective state, at the moment especially Germany, doing about it? Nothing. Nothing. They let everything go until it's too late and everything can hardly be stopped. Those who follow the news on TV these days will see soldiers in many cities of Europe standing with their weapons in attack in front of buildings and on squares. Now they convey apparent security. But what if the screw is tightened more and more from above, and people take to the streets for water, electricity and food, and their certified human rights? What then? The EU dictatorship has already secretly reintroduced the death penalty, which can, so to speak, be carried out in certain incidents. In 1949, George Orwell published his famous novel 1984, which he wrote from 1946 to 1948, on the island of Jura off the coast of Scotland, and which most people have read or at least heard about. George Orwell, or 1984, is always quoted when it comes to commenting critically on state surveillance measures or pointing out tendencies towards a surveillance state. Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, and Edward Snowden, a former NSA employee, risk their lives and physical freedom and health, especially Assange, because of their disclosure of secret information. But that was all for nothing, because now that there are treacherous terrorist attacks lurking everywhere, the anxious citizen is willing to give his blessing to intensify state and private surveillance in the hope that his miserable life will be spared. The EU and all other dictators are laughing up their sleeves. The path to the chip in the head of every newborn is slowly but surely smoothed. Gestapo secret state police, fascism in Italy and Spain, GDR, spying, mistrust even in families and among alleged friends, brutality, etc. Everything is forgotten or seems far away. Now all we have to do is save his own backside, and that's to give away all the privacy our ancestors have gained. Instead of additional surveillance, The people would only have to drastically limit their overpopulation. Let go of the provocation and try to live according to the creational laws and recommendations of being human. That would be much more effective and still the right thing to do. The human beings learn nothing from the past. History has proven this for centuries, no, for millennia. The mockery of Islam over the humiliation of the Prophet Muhammad by Christians corresponds to the mockery of the Jews by Christians because of imaginary or existing special talents, e.g., dealing with money and certain peculiarities of their faith, all this simply by the means of today's time. The bad thing about the whole thing is that hardly anyone cares, neither the scholars, priests, journalists, nor the religious scientists, etc., whether the statements or accusations made are true at all. We need a scapegoat, and any remedy is fine. Any representation, however degenerate, of something unknown is taken over unreflected and unseen, and the followers of the religion or ethnic group are finished. True to the motto, "If you don't want to be my brother, think and act like me, I'll smash your skull in." An outrageous impertinence, lack of character and decency unparalleled. It is well known that until the invention of modern letterpress printing, with interchangeable letters in a printing press, which made the flexible, relatively inexpensive and fast production of larger editions possible, by Johannes Gensfleisch, called Gutenberg, in the 15th century the common people were illiterate, who were only informed orally about the church and the state in a targeted and censored manner, that is to say, could neither write nor read, as is still the case in many countries of the world in the third millennium. Nevertheless, all this is taken at face value about Emmanuel alias Jesus Christ, about his disciples and the disciples embezzled by the Christian church, about Paul, etc., and also about Muhammad, which not only decades, but centuries later, somebody has written down about them in a completely foreign language, as true, untrue, or completely imagined. Even if we know and only get a 100% confirmation via lingui, for example, that a German sentence translated into the English language today has hardly any correspondence with the original in the target translation. This fact is totally neglected or even denied in old traditions. The result is a pure construct of what the translator has read and understood from the basic text. One's own convictions, one's own subjectivity, one's own and/or state doctrine with its beliefs resonate always and everywhere. It used to be, and it still is today. Such a funny story is printed in the NZZ am Sonntag of the 18th of January 2015 under the title, "An Angel Appeared to Muhammad, the Origin of the Quran." It says, among other things, according to his first biographer Ibn Ishaq, Muhammad had retired to the mountains at the age of 40 to meditate. One night, while sleeping in a cave on Hira mountain near Mecca, the angel Jibril Gabriel appeared to him. He brought a silk scarf with him and said, "Read." When Muhammad said that he could not read, the angel pressed him into the cloth and repeated the request so often until Muhammad agreed. And the angel said, "Read in the name of your Lord the Creator, who created man from coagulated blood. Read, and the most noble is thy Lord, he who taught the writing tubes to use what they knew not." Muhammad repeated the sentences that later found their way into the Quran Surah 96. In the next 22 years, further revelations followed. Anyone who reads something like that can't believe their eyes. Quite apart from the fact that angels are either only fantasy figures of the human brain or refer to extraterrestrials, Plejarians, Ishwish, Gospod, Allah, with whom Muhammad also had contact. Here Muhammad is actually portrayed as illiterate and foolish, as it were, and the faithful apparently appreciate that. The dubious satirist Andreas Thiel even calls the venerable Prophet Muhammad a slave driver, child molester, and mass murderer. Such slanderous statements about the Prophet Muhammad can only come from a sick consciousness. Muhammad was an extremely intelligent, educated, and highly wise man, a great strategist and a well-founded expert and user of creational laws and recommendations, which is why, among other things, he advocated equal rights for men and women, and in a positive sense, washed with all waters. In any case, he was also a good reader and writer, as were Emmanuel and all his predecessors from the Nokodemjon prophecy line. In addition, a few important sentences from An Open Word by Billy Figu, Wasser man seit Verlag. But as ever, the truthful Prophet Muhammad never had time to write down his teachings and his warnings and prophecies personally, so he instructed his cousin to do it. But he interpreted everything wrongly at his own discretion and wrote it down in such a falsified way that Muhammad's teaching came to even worse shame than it had done about 500 years before, with Emmanuel's teaching through his brother James and through Paulus Saulus and the disciples Luke, Matthew, Mark, and John. The truthful prophet Muhammad was compelled to act in the known form in order to counteract the traditional idolatrous false doctrines as well as Judaism and Christianity in the main. This predetermined course of action alone, the betrayal of irreligious beliefs, ensured that the then prevailing religions of blood and hatred, as well as the delusional religion of Christianity, did not become so prevalent that within a few centuries they would have dominated the entire earthly humanity to such an extent that earthly humanity, completely blinded by its sectarian religions, would have destroyed itself without any mercy whatsoever through immense and worldwide religious sect wars. So the Prophet Muhammad had to appear and bring the teaching of the truth of the Spirit another time, this time outside of the intended series of teaching offerings. So he appeared as a true prophet outside his normal cycle, dutiful and aware that he would be persecuted and accused of lying as ever. Nevertheless, he complied with his duty, as he had done since time immemorial, and as he fulfilled his duty in his revival as Enoch, Elia, Jesiah, Jeremiah, and Emmanuel, as true prophet who, always true to the laws and recommendations of creation, proclaimed the truthful teaching of the truth and spirit. In documents with statements about the alleged Son of God, or the Prophet of God, Sir Allah, foolishly there is no doubt about their seriousness, even if they are bursting with illogicalness. Like Enoch, Elia, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel alias Jesus Christ, Muhammad was also a true prophet from the Nokodemjon prophecy line. Just like Billy at the present time, only Muhammad was wrongly called a prophet by God/Allah at that time. This was necessary because people were very godly, which is why Muhammad is sometimes called a false prophet. See also the books An Open Word, Talmud Emmanuel, and Goblet of the Truth, Book of the Prophets, etc. Billy, Figu, Aquarian Time Publishing. Coming back to the buzzwords and headlines concerning freedom listed at the beginning, e.e. G. Freedom wins over barbarism. Attack on freedom of expression and freedom of the press, etc. In addition, it has to be said that the term freedom in truth has a completely different meaning than what is commonly understood by freedom, like state of autonomy of a subject Wikipedia, or what the Duden means to it. True freedom is a state of consciousness built upon the given creational, natural, indisputable laws and recommendations of humanity. Man with his mental block, with his consciousness, his thoughts and feelings, and the psyche, is solely responsible via his mind and his reason for the form and evolutionary stage in which he implements freedom for himself. Freedom in the right sense is cultivated inner freedom, which is why it is said that a person can be free even if he is put in chains. The laws and recommendations of being human allow him to accept his painful condition and still be happy and content. Freedom also contains voluntariness, that is, to approach something of one's own free will, of one's own free decision, without compulsion, completely voluntarily from one's inner insight, reason, and wisdom understanding, or to leave it alone, and to allow all other people to do the same, without wanting to convince them of something or brutally force them to do something in a delusion of any kind. In every human being, no matter whether woman, man, or child, only one's own power should unfold, so that man is always aware of his own thoughts and feelings and can unfold and use his knowledge, wisdom, and ability, and thus lead everything to true love, freedom, harmony, and peace within him. A brainwash by a mad terror organization, or a total monitoring, for example, by a chip in the brain, almost completely prevents the evolution of consciousness. Humanity is well on the way to inflicting much suffering, misery, hardship, and harm on itself and its descendants far into the future through a spiral of degenerating violence. Terror, barbarism, irresponsibility, and irrationality, and there is a danger that humanity will consciously catapult itself deep into the Middle Ages or even further back. The human being's freedom. The human being's freedom is not about doing what he or she wants and what he or she can wish for, but rather freedom to do what is within the frame of what is rightful and what corresponds to the dignity of the life. Sim Ya Se Silver Star Center, Thursday, the 7th of July, 2011, 1633 HRS. Billy from Living Life Right. Marianne Eulinger, Switzerland.
The special bulletins by April have all been completed. That is to say, the March issue is already printed, while the February issue is still at Bernadette's and will be completed by her. She and I are just waiting for what you have to say about the articles we want to publish. You said that you found the articles by Occam and Bernadette, which you have already read. Good, while you took the third one, which is from with you and probably also read it in the meantime.
Marianne's article is important, which is why you should rewrite the special bulletin from April to another month, perhaps May. As far as the article by is concerned, I have to say that I find the English version regrettable. Therefore, it should not be published in a discussion block, as well as in a bulletin or special bulletin. The English language corresponds to a deficient children's language, whereby the article held in this language additionally disfigures everything, because the English is miserable. Besides, as author only is indicated, which is not acceptable, because if the full naming is concealed, then this must have very valid reasons, which are not present here in relation to this article, however. So it could also not be allowed that only the nickname is mentioned.
All right, so I'm going to call Bernadette and tell her what you order. And because of the article written in English, which is the language of a disaster, I didn't read it, only what Bernadette translated and made of it.
This should also not be published in a discussion block or in any bulletin or special bulletin, because the original article is not such that it can be authoritative.
Well, I'll call Bernadette so she can settle things.
One moment, Edward.
Then the matter is now clear.
Then I want to say the following privately about what these e-letter pages bring up here.
And what about this one that refers to?
That's all there is to it. But as far as the matter is concerned, I think there is a bias here, and that there is more distance to be maintained, like rational thinking, and the whole thing must also be viewed from a rational point of view. What unfortunately happens, however, I have to judge as euphoric, which loses the clarity of reality. That is my assessment, which I made some time ago but did not discuss, because it would have been too early.
Understood.
Talking about this with there is a necessity.
I will. But what about the new stack cutter, which is why you came here today? Do you want to inspect it now?
And Jana has informed me why I'm here now. If it is possible now.
Of course. Come, I want to show you the new machine and briefly explain.
Thank you for your explanation. There have been some innovations since then when I first inspected the device about 25 years ago.
Look here. I still have copies of a detailed description and the manual.
Thank you.
Then a question. What about next Saturday? Can we correct the last report?
This will be possible at the usual time.
That's good. But look here. This newspaper article was sent to us.
The Pope and the reproduction, not how the rabbits reproduce.
In the Philippines, the Pope sets a world record. 6 million people attend his Mass. But on the return flight, Francis still has something to say about reproduction and rabbits. Pope Francis has promoted prudent family planning. The head of the Catholics said on Monday that he was in line with the Church's rejection of contraception. But that does not mean that Christians should have one child after another. God had given people the means to act responsibly. Some believe, and excuse the expression, to be good Catholics, they would have to reproduce like rabbits. Alcuni credono, scusatemi la parola, che per essere buoni cattolici dobbiamo essere come I conigli. To be open to life is a prerequisite for the sacrament of marriage, stressed Francis. 3 children per couple would be ideal. Francis spoke to journalists on the return flight from the Philippines to Rome. He had previously visited Sri Lanka as part of his trip to Asia. In his comments on the family, he told of a woman whom he had met once and who had been pregnant with the 8th child after 7 cesarean sections. Their behavior was irresponsible, the Pope said. I asked her, "Do you want to leave 7 orphans behind?" A prudent family planning is important, and the Church offers sufficient dialogue for it. Visit to Argentina. The Church leader also announced a trip to Africa with visits to Uganda and the Central African Republic later this year. The trip would probably take place towards the end of the year, said Francis. In July, he will also travel to Ecuador, Bolivia, and Paraguay. Already at the end of September, the Pope travels to the USA. He will also visit the United Nations in New York. The head of the Catholics also wants to go to Washington and Philadelphia for World Family Day. According to the news agency ANSA, the 78-year-old said that Chile, Uruguay, and his native Argentina are on the program for the coming year. In Europe, a trip to France has already been announced. Source: NTV. D-Melly/DPA/AFP.
It is really interesting, and even obvious, that, as it is written at the beginning, your books and writings and also the bulletins are known to the Pope, thus confirming what I told you at the 434th official contact meeting on the 9th of September 2006.
I didn't doubt it.
Then, I would like to say the following with regard to what has already been discussed privately. I guess that says everything that needs to be said. I want to leave now. Goodbye, Edward, my dear friend.
Dear friend, I also say goodbye to you, and then see you Saturday.